In this lesson, we're going to download and install Kali Linux into our VirtualBox environment. To do that, we're going to open up our web browser first, in my case, Google Chrome. We are going to go to kali.org, Kali.org. Once you get there, you're going to click on the Download button from the menu. And from Downloads, we're going to go to Download Kali Linux. From here, we're going to select the ISO, the Kali 64-bit ISO file, which is 2.6 gigabytes. So it may take a couple minutes depending on the speed of your internet connection. I'm going to pause the video here and speed up to when the download has finished at this point. Alright, once Kali Linux ISO has downloaded, what we're going to do is close out our web browser, and we're going to open up VirtualBox. Now, from VirtualBox, we're going to hit New, and we're going to give it a name. I like to use the name Kali Linux because that's what we're installing. If you do that, you'll see automatically that it does recognize it is a Linux type. It is a 2.6 64-bit, which actually matches up with what we're going to be using. Next, we'll hit Continue. We're going to give it 2 gigabytes of RAM. On my system, I happen to have 16 gigabytes of RAM. If you're using only a 4 gigabyte system on your laptop, you may want to use only 1024 megabytes or 1 gigabyte of RAM. But because we're going to do some hacking, I like to have a little extra RAM available, so I'll use 2 gigabytes or 2048 megabytes and then hit Continue. For your hard disk, what we're going to do is we are going to create a hard disk now and hit Create. And we're going to use a VirtualBox disk image and hit Continue. And we're going to dynamically allocate. What that means is it's not going to use up the entire amount of space on your hard drive right now. It'll only use it as it needs it. And then we'll hit Continue. Next, we're going to give it a size. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it 40 gigabytes to make sure I have plenty of space. And then I'll hit Create. And that hard disk has been virtually created. Now, for us to boot up the first time, what we're going to have to do is actually create what's called an optical drive by clicking here where it says Optical Drive Empty. And then choose Disk Image. And we're going to choose the ISO file that we had just downloaded, which for me happens to be in my Downloads folder. And you'll see there it is, Kali Linux 2017.1-amd64.iso, which is 2.79 gigabytes, and we'll hit Open. At this point, we're ready to launch and install Kali Linux. So we'll click on Kali once and then hit Start, and it will boot up. And what I will end up doing is I will select the graphical install. And now that we're in the graphical install, I'm going to choose my language, which is English, and hit Continue. I'm going to choose the United States where I live, and then I'm going to use American English for my keyboard. At this point, it's going to do some automatic configuration, mostly to do with our network, and then it will ask you what the host name is for your system. My host name, I'm just going to use Kali just to keep it easy. We'll hit Continue. And a domain name. For most of us, we're not going to have our own domain on our home network. So in this case, we can just skip it and leave it blank and hit Continue. Now we're going to set up our passwords. Kali by default likes to use root for the username because it is the root account, and they usually use Tor, T-O-O-R, for the password, which is root spelled backwards. In this case, that's what I'm going to use just to keep it easy for our lab. You can use whatever password you want to use, but for mine, that's what I'm going to use, and we'll hit Continue. You'll choose what configuration you have for your clock. In my case, I'm on the East Coast. I live by DC, so therefore I am the Eastern time zone. And now my hard disk is going to be configured. At this point, I want to use the entire disk and hit Continue. And I will select the virtual hard disk we just created, that 40 gigabyte disk, and hit Continue. And all the files in one partition will be fine. We'll hit Continue, and then finish making the changes and hit Continue. Do you want to write the changes to the disk? Yes, because we want to be able to install our software. Continue. And at this point, it's going to copy that 3 gigabyte-ish file of Kali over as it installs it onto the hard drive, that 40 gigabyte hard drive that we made. Again, this will take just a few moments. I'm going to speed up the video so you don't have to wait watching the progress bar creep to the right. At this point, it's going to ask, do you want to use a network mirror to be able to supplement the software that's on the CD-ROM? We're going to go ahead and say yes and hit Continue. And if you have a proxy, which most of us don't at our home, we'll just hit continue. If you have a proxy, put it there. At this point, it's going to configure your package manager, and we'll get to the next part of the installation. And at this point, it's going to ask if you want to install the Grub bootloader. Go ahead and say yes, and then click on the hard drive you wish to install, which will be our SDA1, our VirtualBox hard drive, and hit continue. And at this point, it's just going to finish up your installation, and then it should boot to Kali Linux. At this point, hit continue. And when it reboots, you're going to be at the Grub bootloader. Just hit enter on Kali New Linux, and Kali will boot to its desktop. If your system asks to make configuration changes to the firewall to let VirtualBox out, I'm going to say yes because I want to be able to access the internet from my Kali box. Put in your root and your Tor for your password, and once you sign in, your desktop will show up. And your desktop should look like this, where you have the dragon showing up, and this is your standard Kali desktop. We're going to explore this more in the next lesson.